Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go!
First, though, we'll give you a little view of downtown Cadiz because there's several antique stores here. Cherokee Antiques is one of my favorites. It's a nice mall and they've got a lot of cool stuff. Next door is Cadiz Antique Mall. And we're in Cadiz, Kentucky, named after the town of the same name in Spain. You can see a nice little downtown here. These are really fun flying saucer salt and peppers. They're priced at $10. These used to go for a lot more. I don't know what they go for now. But these are from the 1950s, and of course this is what they thought spaceships were going to look like back then. So that makes them even better. China with cards and casino-related motifs is something we see starting about 1910 with this series, which is by Royal Bayreuth in Germany. And you'll notice the winged devil on it. That devilware was very popular around 1910. It was a time when people were really discussing vices like drinking and the prospect of prohibition. And for the people who were a little more ribald back then, this was a big seller. It was very popular at the time, and they're pretty collectible now. We've got a couple of older Carnival glass pieces here. The one on the left is a pattern named Raisin Ribbons. Now you'll notice there's sort of a silver tone to the edge on the Carnival glass, and some people really like that, and some people want it to be more of a goldish. This particular one is amethyst glass, or they called it amethyst. It's really purple as opposed to the black amethyst where it's so thick that it shows black. And this piece is priced at $39. It's a pretty good deal. Carnival glass doesn't sell as high as it used to, and you'll notice that because this has been marked down, but this is a really nice piece with a very strong pattern. Benton Stag and Holly, and what's nice about this is it's a very bold pattern. You see the large stag in the middle of it, and a lot of Carnival glass collectors now really look not so much for the subtle patterns, they want the things that really jump out. This one is marigold in color if you turn it over, and it's a footed piece. Being footed is a little bit better in terms of value typically. And these round bottoms in the middle, that is a Fenton characteristic that carried through their wares up until about 1940. These are fun because in the box they look like little paper coasters, but when you flip them around, you find out they are a deck of playing cards. And the important things with decks of playing cards, of course, are condition. These are in good condition. They are called the Rondo circular playing cards. And these would have been made sometime about 1960, and they have the jokers. Very important if you're buying playing cards. People want the entire deck with the jokers, so you need 54, and you need to count them and make sure they're all there. I think I'm going to get these because we have a viewer who really enjoys playing cards and is doing a lot of research on them now, and I think it's something she may not have seen, so we're going to pick them up and we'll be able to show them off. One thing that's a specialty here that you don't see in a lot of antique stores is vintage swords, cutlery, guns, that sort of thing. He's got some interesting ones. This is something we should show. Whenever you see the chrysanthemum handle, that chrysanthemum stands for Japan. These were initially issued for the Japo-Russian War in 1908. And then at the end of World War II, when we were about to invade, a whole lot of them were given back to Japanese citizens in order to defend themselves, and so a whole lot of our guys ended up confiscating them at the end of the war. And that's why we see them in the United States, even though they're from before World War II, they were confiscated at the end of it. They've got that priced about $2.50, which is about what they go for now.
A couple more of these neat little whiskey jugs.
The little corn liquor bottles are sometimes more valuable than the big ones because the small ones were samples and it took a lot of work to make them, and then they gave them away for free. So they weren't anxious to do that too many times. So you see prices as high as $2.50 on these, but for a serious collector, some of those are hard enough to find. They'll pay it.
And then these things are neat, these little shoes. These are hiding either knives or sewing implements, or sometimes tobacco. They'll turn into a little tobacco pipe. They are very cool, especially the leather uppers that look like the 19 teens or 20 shoes in the middle there. Pinups on the punch boards to get people to play. You would actually win cigarettes because it was illegal to win money, but cigarettes, that was fine. This is a parade helmet from the time of the Indian Wars. Now the plume has been replaced, but the rest of it is genuine. So that's going to date back to, gosh, the middle 1800s. These are Civil War bleeders. This is what they used out in the field if they had to cut someone to drain blood or to try to prevent infection. And they could be used on humans or horses. And behind you have a hoof cleaner. Pretty grisly, but very collectible and rather valuable. This is just the neatest lacquerware box. I don't know what its original function was. It looks like it just has a tray for paper. Maybe that's all it was. It's very lightweight, but I love the Art Deco design and the colors on it are great. And it was made by the Okinawa company. So this is Japanese lacquerware, probably from right before or right after the Second World War. And they're asking $22.50. You are a stranger here but once, J&B Scotch. This is a neat old tavern sign. It's just foil on paper. It's from about the early 80s, but it's $6 and it's never been used. Here is an old telephone box, and this one's really antique because the door is oak, and so is the telephone. This is priced at $8.95. This is cottage ware. These are usually by the Price Company in England. This one has a nice mark, and it says on the back, as it should, Cottage Bank, priced at $39. Not too bad as cottage ware goes for the bank. That's a pretty decent price. They have still banks for as little as $12 for the Liberty Bell and $5 for Mission Orange. And then they've got the Lion and the Safe. So it's a fun variety here. The classic Oliver typewriter that looks like it's going to take off with all of the key strikes mounted that way as opposed to the way we're used to seeing it in this typewriter, the Remington Standard. They've got a couple of other interesting things here. This would have been a stenographer's machine for shorthand, like you see with court reporters and that sort of stuff. Here, this one's really cool. This is the multiplex Hammond. You notice there's no frame under it. They just figured the rest of the machine was so heavy, and this is supposed to be a portable, so they didn't add the extra weight. This is an unusual typewriter, and it's when you get into this era of typewriters that you start really seeing values go up. This one's priced at $195. These have been all polished and burnished, and this shows you why people like the old copper and brass, because it does shine up really nicely. These old brass propellers are in the $95 each range. That's a selling price, honestly. They will go for that. Whiskey jugs are another really popular area of collecting. These are all pre-prohibition, and these are going to mainly be by the Knowles Company. They all have a similar shape, but they'd have a good transfer decal with the information about the company. So you've got Old Maryland, which is made in St. Louis. Don't know why it's Old Maryland from St. Louis, but there it is. Pennsylvania Club, Pure Rye. That's a neat looking one. These are all going to be things made just before you couldn't buy this stuff in the United States anymore. This one is expressly for medicinal use and from East Liverpool, Ohio, which is where Homer Laughlin was made. But Knowles Taylor Knowles was in that area as well, along with other makers. Another Old Maryland. And Meredith's Diamond Club, again, this is the little version. Pretty collectible now. A lot of people like pre-prohibition items, and I think those prices seem pretty good, so I may be interested in a couple of those. So we've got a lot of fun things in here, a wind-up Santa drummer, but this made me think of Misty at Thrifter Junker Vintage Hunter. If you ever look at her site on YouTube, she has all sorts of Easter collectibles. She loves holiday stuff, and it's a lot of fun. And she likes creepy stuff too, and this has that going on as well. Believe it or not, this set here is Lenox China once again. Lenox didn't do a lot of brownware. It does have the mark, which may be hard to see, But Lenox in the early days, around the 1920s particularly, really caught on to the sterling overlay, which was being done on glass, and they decided to do it on ceramics, and it gave it a really attractive and different look. And this is electroplated on, so if you broke it off, you wouldn't really have a big chunk of silver left. It would probably break with the piece. That's the difference between the silver overlay that's a net of silver applied as opposed to electroplated on. But it really gives it a different appearance. So instead of just a plain brown tea set, you end up with something really stylish. It's priced at $125, and honestly, that's probably max where they go these days, but there are people who really like their metal applied pieces. So all three of these are Pilgrim cranberry glass, and these are 1980s and 90s pieces. I used to be involved with repping glass for the Pilgrim Glass Company back in that period of time, and they were really beautiful and they sold really well. The company went out of business in 2001 because of the Gulf War. It drove the price of natural gas up to a point where they couldn't produce anymore, and that was pretty much the end of most of the West Virginia glass companies that were left, with the exception of Blanco and some studio companies that are still going. So while I'm thinking of it, please comment in the space below here, and also hit the thumbs up button to like this video. If you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button below. Also, hit the bell below to be notified of new videos coming every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And thank you so much for following along. Let's go back to this video. If you remember the old lunch counters and greasy spoons from the 1950s and 60s, then you might be old enough to remember seeing this in them. This would be advertising Heinz 57 varieties, but it was really a food service for where they would do soups and this sort of thing. And the Campbell's soup company is advertised on the cup, so it's really just a ton of advertising on this piece. And that's part of what makes them interesting to people now. They generally still work. They were made really well out of stainless steel and very high quality electronic components because they were expected to do a lot of duty every day in restaurants for years and years. And most of them were just pulled out of those restaurants when the chain restaurants took over, and a lot of these went out of business. Unfortunately, a lot of them were thrown away at that point, so they're actually not as common as they were then. And this one's priced at about $170. That's the price I've seen them sell for in the past. This thing is really cool. This one happens to be Japanese, but it looks just like the Western ones. This would have been for your throttle control for a fairly sizable boat or ship. And on the front you see the various settings, and you can hear it going through its motions. I'm sure it would still work. You've got a head and a stern, and then on the top, so that you can see it without having to look at the front dial, you have your stop, your standby, dead slow, finished with engine, all the things that you need to be able to do in order to properly steer some sort of a sizable floating vessel. Really neat looking. It's priced at $17.50. I've seen them anywhere from $12.50 on up. It is possible that it would sell for this price. Underneath it's got a really nice brass element to it. I suspect that somebody who buys this will probably take the paint off. I think the paint was probably repainted at various times in the life of this boat, and so someone will strip it down and it will just glow bright, and then it will definitely be a $1,700 item. This dealer has a bunch of vintage fashion, and in amongst it I see this really cool velvet ribbon piece. The star is a little bit worn, but it's really neat looking, and I've had a lot of luck selling vestments to people who want to wear them as costume or for theater, or just because it's a different look. So wow, $15. This is probably from a fraternal organization. I would say sometime around 1900 or 1910. It would have been worn like this. And this apron actually has a metallic fabric. You can see here when you get close that this is actually almost like coil springs. You know, even though it's slightly worn in the star on the sequins, I think I'm going to take this piece because $15 seems really inexpensive to me, and I think someone will find some really interesting use for this. And it's also sizable, and it'll look cool in a display. And I finally have a show coming up again, so I'm going to get this. If you have kids and you're worried about collecting because you're afraid they'll break stuff, this sign says it all. I have a friend who, when her kids were little, started collecting restaurant china because it was inexpensive and they wouldn't break it, and it has fun, interesting patterns on it. This one says the Stevens. This is a relish tray from an old hotel. Sometimes you'd see these with railroad logos, and sometimes you would see them later on with airline logos. So it's all in the guise of restaurant china, and it's pretty collectible. Certain pieces can be really valuable. This one is only $8.95, and I don't know where the Stevens Hotel was, but it's got a fun pattern. And if I could figure out where that was from, I would definitely get it, because online somebody will know where this is from, and they would gladly pay more than $8.95 for that piece. This is a cool piece. This is a miner's record, and this is when the United Mine Workers of America have just started, and this meant that somebody in the local union, this is lithograph from probably about 1900 or 1910, because you see there's a streetcar and a horse-drawn carriage, but there's no automobiles. It shows all the different aspects of mining, and then it shows that he was called from labor to rest. So these were given to somebody when someone in the family's miner died in the mine in an accident. And this is a pretty sad thing, but a really interesting thing that you just don't really see anymore. I've rarely encountered these, but because we're in Kentucky, where coal mining was such a big part of the economy for so long, we run into these things here sometimes, and they are very collectible. This little piece in my hand here is an oddball thing, and the Recycled Life recently held one of these up and said, "What in the world is this?" And I didn't know until fairly recently myself. These were sometimes used for shelling corn and known as corn shellers. They also were used as pot scrubbers because they could go around a metal pot easily and be used to scrape, kind of like the early version of those scrubber sponges that we have now. And this one is priced, I think, at $9.95. And as a curiosity, people love these. They hang them on the wall mainly, and then say, "Hey, guess what this is?" And everyone tries to figure it out. But that's the answer for you. The Indian maiden grinding the corn is one of the classic Van Briggle pottery pieces. And this one is going to be probably towards the end of their production. They went out of business, I believe, in the 1990s, but this was originally designed shortly after the time that artist Van Briggle and his family moved to Colorado Springs. They started in Ohio, and he had some sort of respiratory problems, and his doctor said they should move to Colorado, and they moved the pottery factory to Colorado Springs. And he died shortly thereafter, but the family continued to make things using his molds and designs for a period of several decades. She's a really pretty piece. She comes in various shades of greens and blues as well, and different sizes. And this particular one is priced at $225. And looking at the mark on the bottom, which is a little hard to show you, it doesn't say Anna Van Briggle, which are the granddaughter's lines, which were later. So I think she might be in the middle period, more like 1950s. And they're pretty collectible still. And then behind we have a very body maiden on a tankard from about 1900. That would have been considered very risque, and not very many people would have had her, so she's pretty uncommon. She's got a lot of crackling or crazing between the top glaze and the transfer. That's a transfer decal underneath. That's a really beautiful piece, and most people consider it art these days. Hopefully YouTube will as well. Then here we have a bunch of old desk accessories and a motometer, which is the one laying upside down there. That's an old radiator hood ornament, so you could see whether you were boiling over or not. It's got a thermometer in it. Sterling beer. This was a regional beer, and they're welcoming the Kentucky Derby fans of 1981. It's got one scrape on it, but it's $10. And, you know, that is tempting. This is something that I really appreciate because it's from Dawson Springs, Kentucky, which is my adopted hometown here in Kentucky. And if you watch my old hometown video, you'll see the pump that sat right inside the door at Hamby's Hotel. Hamby was the one who found the first waters that were considered curative in Dawson Springs, and he really put the town on the map as a water spa.
and it was a big deal for about 20 years. There's little hutches and bottles that were sold with the water in them. Those are very collectible, and so are these old mugs, especially the ones that show places like Hamby's Hotel that are not there anymore. This is going to date to about well, it says on the back, 17. And this is priced about $65. In terms of souvenir collectibles, they're always worth the most money if you're near the place that they came from.
The one on the left is the New Century Hotel. It was the finest water spa resort in the state and in a large region, and attracted thousands of people in its heyday. It's long gone now. And then some nice ones with design. It was a tourist place, so people bought tourist souvenirs, and now they're all coming back here because the collectors are in this area.
Well, the sun is setting, Cherokee Antiques is closing, and I managed to close them down with a nice sale. They were happy, I was happy, I like what I got, and I'm sure you'll see it at my shows coming soon. In the meantime, this is George the Antique Nomad. I'm with you on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and here on YouTube. Thanks for coming and watching, and we'll go along on another adventure soon. Bye-bye now. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.